A deserted highway. A broken bus stops in the middle of nowhere. Doors slowly creak open. Cut to Dubai skyline at night. By 2 a.m., the ship no longer felt like a place of safety. It felt like something caught, trapped between two worlds. The green lights never disappeared. They pulsed beneath the water. Slow, breathing, alive. Aiko sat in silence. Then she said something that made Kenji's blood run cold. "They're not ghosts." Kenji looked at her. "Then what are they?" She lifted her eyes. "They're still alive." "That's impossible." "No," Aiko said quietly. "They didn't die. They were taken." The deck suddenly grew wet, water rising, not from waves, from below. Then, hands emerged, dozens, then hundreds, white, swollen, reaching over the edges of the ship. "Run!" Kenji screamed. They locked themselves in the control room. Outside, banging, scratching, crying. Mika's voice. "Let me in." Ren's voice. "I'm cold." Kenji covered his ears. Captain Hiroshi drew his weapon. Aiko whispered, "They're changing." Then silence. Water began seeping under the door. Along with it, green light, flickering, watching. Captain Hiroshi said quietly, "We're not getting out of this." Aiko stood up. "I know how to stop it." Kenji shouted, "How?" She pointed to the ocean. "That light. It's a gate." "They're trapped there," she continued, "and they need more people to keep it open." Captain Hiroshi asked, "So how do we close it?" Aiko looked at them. "One of us has to go willingly." Silence filled the room. Kenji shook his head. "No, no, no." Aiko smiled faintly. "My father is down there." She walked toward the door. No one stopped her, because deep down, they knew. She stepped onto the deck. The sea was glowing, waiting. She looked down. Her reflection stared back, but with green eyes. "I'm coming." She jumped. The moment she touched the water, everything stopped. The lights vanished. The sea went dark. The sounds disappeared. Morning came. Only two survived. Captain Hiroshi, Kenji. They returned. But they were not the same, because the sea does not let go. Days later, Kenji began noticing water where it shouldn't be. On the floor, in the sink, on the walls, and inside that water. Green light. One night, he saw her. Aiko, standing in the water, smiling, her eyes glowing. "You saw the light," she said. "Now you belong to it." The next morning, Kenji was gone. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, only water and faint green light. Still glowing, Ethan collapsed to his knees. This can't be real." But the bus didn't stop. It kept moving through a road that didn't exist. Outside, the world had changed. No trees, no sky, just an endless gray void. Like reality itself had been erased. No escape. Ethan tried the doors again. Nothing. He punched the glass. No cracks, no sound. It was like hitting solid steel. "You can't leave," the woman said softly. "Not until your stop." Ethan turned to her. "My stop?" She nodded slowly. "Everyone has one." Ethan's voice shook. "And if I don't want to get off?" The driver answered. "You don't choose." The other passengers. Ethan looked around, now that he knew the truth. He saw them differently. Each passenger carried signs of how they died. The wet man, drowned. A child with burned skin, fire. A soldier missing half his face, explosion. They weren't just passengers, they were victims. Trapped, forever riding this bus. "Where does it go?" Ethan whispered. The soldier replied, his voice hollow. "Nowhere. Time doesn't exist." Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Ethan couldn't tell. There was no clock, no sense of time, just the endless ride. And then, the bus slowed. The driver spoke. Next stop, the doors opened. The first drop-off. A woman stood up, her neck twisted at an impossible angle. She walked toward the door. Before stepping out, she turned to Ethan. "Don't fight it," she whispered. Then she stepped into the void and vanished. The doors closed. The bus moved again. Ethan felt something inside him shift. Fear turning into something worse. Hopelessness. The real horror. After a while, Ethan noticed something terrifying. The passengers were changing. Their wounds were healing, their skin regaining color, their eyes becoming alive. One by one, they disappeared at their stops, and new passengers replaced them. Fresh bodies, fresh deaths, fresh fear. Ethan realized this bus wasn't just for the dead. It was a cycle, endless. Ethan stopped. Finally, the driver spoke again. "Last stop." Ethan's heart stopped. No, not yet. The doors opened, but this time, he saw something different. Not a void, not darkness. A road, a familiar road, Route 61, the gas station, the flashing police lights, his body covered with a sheet. Ethan stepped closer. "This is where I died," the woman's voice echoed in his head. "You can leave, but remember, you won't come back." The choice Ethan hesitated. Behind him, the bus, cold, silent, endless. Ahead, whatever waited beyond death. "Is this heaven?" he asked. The driver replied, "No." "Is it hell?" "No." "Then what is it?" The driver paused, then said something that chilled Ethan to his core. "It's after." The final twist. Ethan stepped off the bus. The moment his foot touched the ground, everything went black. Silence. Then voices, doctors shouting, machines beeping. Ethan gasped. He was alive, barely. He opened his eyes, hospital lights above him. A nurse screamed, "He's back!" But it didn't end. Weeks later, Ethan recovered. Everyone called it a miracle. But Ethan knew the truth. He didn't escape. He was sent back. Because one night, while driving home, he saw it again. The same bus, same flickering headlights, stopping slowly beside him. The doors opened, and inside, he saw someone sitting in the middle seat. Someone new, confused, terrified, just like he was. And the driver turned his head toward Ethan, even without a face. Ethan knew it was smiling. Final line. From that night on, Ethan never stopped driving because he knew if that bus ever stopped for him again, he wouldn't be coming back. Part 2. Dubai, the tower that called at midnight. Dubai looked unreal at night. From the outside, the city felt too perfect to be haunted. Glass towers pierced the sky like polished blades. Highways curved under ribbons of white and red headlights. Luxury cars purred below billboards that never slept. The desert beyond the city lay silent, as if it were waiting for something that belonged to an older world. People said Dubai was a city built in defiance of emptiness. They were wrong. It was built on top of it. Omar Rahman had lived in Dubai for 4 years, and in all that time he had never believed a word of the old stories. He laughed when older maintenance workers whispered about places that should have remained buried under sand. He rolled his eyes when night guards refused certain routes through unfinished towers. He dismissed them all with the same phrase, "Concrete doesn't remember." He was an electrical engineer, practical to the point of cruelty. Wires made sense. Systems made sense. Faults had sources. Power failures had causes. Even strange noises in giant buildings could be explained by pressure changes, shifting steel, imperfect installations. That was why, on the last Thursday night of October, he agreed to take the emergency call alone. The building was called Al Noor Residences, a luxury tower on the edge of the city's newest development zone. It had been finished only 6 months earlier, 39 floors of glass, marble, and expensive silence. Most apartments were still empty. Investors had bought them as assets, not homes. At night, only a handful of windows glowed. The call came at 11:13 p.m. A resident on the 34th floor reported repeated power fluctuations, flickering corridor lights, and a strange sound in the walls. Building management wanted it fixed before morning. Omar was closest, so they sent him. By the time he parked beneath the tower, the streets around the development were nearly deserted. The active parts of the city shimmered in the distance, but here, the roads felt too wide, too clean, and too empty. The tower itself rose above him like a black mirror, reflecting only scraps of moonlight and the red blink of aircraft warning beacons. The front entrance was unlocked. That was the first thing he didn't like. This was Dubai. Buildings like this had layers of security, guards, cameras, keycard access, but the revolving door stood still, unlocked, and the lobby beyond it was dark except for the receptionist desk lamp, which glowed a weak amber. No guard, no receptionist, only silence. Omar stepped inside and the air conditioning hit him, dry and cold. The marble floor reflected his footsteps. On the far wall, a digital directory flickered between screens, then went black, then lit up again with a single line of text. "Welcome home." Omar frowned. Very funny. He assumed some software glitch. Still, the lobby felt wrong. Luxury lobbies were designed to feel warm and expensive. This one felt like a hotel after evacuation. He called the building manager, Saeed. No answer. He tried the guard desk intercom. Static. He told himself it was just a badly managed property and headed toward the service elevators. The normal lifts were out of order. One display flashed random floor numbers, too fast to be real. The service lift, at least, responded to his key. As the metal doors slid shut, he noticed something scratched into the stainless steel wall near the control panel. It was Arabic, carved deep with something sharp. "La trid idha nadakum min fawq." Do not answer if it calls you from above. Omar stared at it for a second, annoyed more than unsettled. Workers wrote nonsense everywhere. He pressed 34. The lift rose. Floor 8, floor 14, floor 21. On 27, the lights went out. The elevator did not stop. It continued upward in complete darkness, humming steadily as if nothing had happened. Omar swore and pulled out his phone, using the flashlight. The beam shook slightly in his hand, not because he was afraid, he told himself, but because the air in the lift had suddenly turned colder. Then, from directly above the ceiling panel, came a sound. A soft knock. 3 taps. Omar looked up. Another 3 taps answered. Then a voice, muffled by metal, came from above him. "Can you hear me?" His whole body went still. It was a man's voice, low and strained, as though speaking through a vent. Omar stepped back and looked toward the ceiling hatch. "Who's there?" The voice waited a moment, then replied, "Please, don't let it know you can hear me." The lift stopped so abruptly Omar nearly lost his balance. The floor indicator glowed red. 39. He had pressed 34. The doors opened. There was no hallway outside, only darkness. Not darkness like an unlit room. This was thick, depthless black, like the elevator had opened into the inside of a sealed coffin. Omar stabbed at the door close button. Nothing happened. Then the voice above whispered, urgent now. "Do not step out." Something moved in the dark outside the lift. Not quickly. Not enough to see shape. just a subtle interruption in the blackness, as though the darkness itself had leaned closer. The doors slammed shut. The lights came back on. The floor indicator changed from 39 to 34. The lift dinged pleasantly, and when the doors opened again, there was a normal hallway outside. Cream walls, recessed lights, expensive carpet, framed abstract art, everything exactly as it should have been. Omar stood frozen in the lift for several seconds before stepping out. He turned back to inspect the panel. He looked above. The scratched warning on the wall seemed deeper somehow. He didn't like the pounding in his chest. He liked it even less because it made no sense. Elevators glitched. A software bug, sensor malfunction, someone messing with him. That was all. The corridor was empty, but the lights at the far end flickered in a slow sequence like something passing beneath them. Omar followed. Apartment 3407 was the unit that had reported the issue. He knocked. No answer. He rang the bell. Nothing. The management key worked, and the door opened inward onto an immaculate apartment, washed in dim gold light from the city outside. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Dubai like a field of stars. Inside, everything was pristine. No signs of habitation except for a single half-full glass of water on the kitchen counter. The lights flickered once, then twice, then went out. Only the city outside illuminated the apartment now, turning furniture into angular shadows, where from somewhere inside the walls came the same sound the resident had reported. A dragging, hollow sound, like fingers running slowly through a ventilation shaft. Omar switched on his flashlight and moved carefully through the apartment, checking outlets, breaker panel, wiring access. Everything seemed normal. Too normal, until he reached the master bedroom. The room was empty except for a mattress still wrapped in plastic, untouched curtains, and a mirror leaning against the wall. In the flashlight beam, the mirror showed Omar standing alone in the room. Then, the reflection moved after he stopped. Not by much. Only a half-second late. Omar stared. His reflection stared back. A fraction too late, smiling faintly, though his own mouth was not moving. The flashlight slipped in his sweaty grip. When the beam jerked away and back again, the mirror showed nothing unusual. Just himself. Pale, irritated, breathing too fast. He backed out of the room and called Saeed again. This time, Saeed answered on the first ring. Omar? Where are the guards? A pause. What do you mean? I'm in Al Noor. The lobby is empty. The elevators are malfunctioning. Some resident's apartment is open and... Saeed cut him off. Al Noor? Yes. Another pause, longer now. Then Saeed spoke very softly. Omar, Al Noor has been closed for 3 weeks. Omar felt the air leave his lungs. What? There was an incident, Saeed said. A worker died during final maintenance on the upper mechanical level. The owners didn't want publicity. Residents were relocated while they investigated electrical faults and other complaints. Omar turned slowly, sweeping the flashlight across the empty apartment. Nobody told me that. You weren't supposed to get that assignment, Saeed said. Who called you? The office dispatch. No one is in the office tonight. The lights came back on all at once. Every lamp in the apartment blazed to life with a violent electric snap. At the same time, the front door of the apartment slammed shut. Omar spun around. On the far side of the living room, just beyond the island counter, stood a man in a dark maintenance uniform. He was tall and thin, soaked in shadow despite the lights. His face was obscured. Around his neck hung a security pass that swung gently, though no air moved. Saeed was still talking through the phone. voice cracking with fear. "Omar, listen to me carefully. If you see anyone from maintenance, do not speak to him. I do not follow him. Leave the building now." The figure tilted his head. Then, in a voice identical to the one Omar had heard above the elevator, he said, "Too late." The phone died. Omar ran. He lunged for the apartment door, yanked it open, and stumbled into the corridor. Behind him, he heard no footsteps, but the corridor lights began shutting off one by one as he sprinted, darkness racing toward him from both ends. He hit the stairwell door and shoved through it. The stairwell should have been harshly lit and concrete gray. Instead, it was dim, lit only by a red emergency bulb on each landing. The shadows between floors looked endless. Omar started down, taking the steps 2 at a time. From above him came the sound of another door opening, then footsteps, measured, unhurried, coming down after him. Omar didn't look back. At the 31st floor landing, he nearly collided with a woman sitting on the stairs. She wore a pale abaya and held her shoes in her hands. Her head was bent low, so her hair veiled her face. Omar skidded to a stop. "Ma'am, you need to get out. Now." She lifted her head. Her face was covered in fine dust, as if she had been pulled from beneath collapsed stone. Her eyes were bloodshot and ringed with black. Her lips cracked into a trembling whisper. "It only calls men first," she said. "Women hear the scratching later." Omar backed away. "What are you talking about?" She looked past him, up the stairwell, and began to sob. The footsteps from above stopped. Then from the darkness between landings came that same voice. Omar. He had never told it his name. The woman stood suddenly and gripped his arm with shocking strength. "Don't answer." The red bulb overhead burst, showering them with glass. In the darkness, something started descending the stairs. Omar yanked free and bolted downward again, the woman's sobs echoing behind him. He reached the 28th floor and pushed into the corridor, hoping to find another lift, another exit, another human being. Instead, he found the entire floor flooded with ankle-deep sand. Not construction dust. Sand. Fine, dry desert sand spilling in endless drifts down the hall, gathering against apartment doors. Footprints crossed it in all directions. Bare human footprints. Hundreds of them. All leading toward the far end of the corridor. Where there should not have been a window, there was now a vast pane of black glass, showing moonlit dunes stretching forever. And in the reflection of that glass, standing behind Omar, it was a full bus. Its interior was lit, every seat occupied, every passenger staring forward. Omar turned. The corridor was empty. When he looked back at the glass, the bus reflection remained. One figure at the front stood out from the others, the driver, or perhaps a conductor. Its head turned toward him in the glass. Then the corridor speakers crackled alive overhead. A calm female voice, the kind used for luxury announcements, filled the floor. "Attention, residents," it said. "The final ascent is now boarding." Every apartment door clicked open at once. Inside each apartment, darkness. From every open doorway came a low whispering, like dozens of people repeating the same prayer under their breath. Omar ran again. This time, he didn't stop until he reached the service room near the central shaft. Then he slammed the door behind him and shoved a metal cabinet against it. His hands shook so hard, he nearly dropped his flashlight. The room contained breakers, cable trays, duct access, and a maintenance terminal still powered on. On the monitor was a CCTV feed from the upper levels. At first, the cameras showed nothing unusual. Empty hallways, stairwells, silent lifts. Then, one by one, the the feeds changed. The lobby camera showed the front doors chained shut from the inside. The 34th floor corridor camera showed Omar standing outside apartment 3407. But Omar was in the service room on 28. The version of him on the screen stood motionless, head bowed. Then the screen figure lifted its face toward the camera. It wasn't Omar. Its face was too long, eyes too deep, smile too wide. Another feed changed. The 39th floor mechanical corridor appeared, though as far as Omar knew, tenants could not access it. At the end of that corridor hung the body of a man in a maintenance harness, suspended from exposed cable. A security pass gleamed at his chest. The camera zoomed in by itself. The dead man's face came into focus. It was the figure Omar had seen in the apartment. Its eyes snapped open and fixed directly on the lens. Then the service room door behind Omar rattled once, twice, 3 times. A voice came through the metal, soft, polite, patient. "You came because the lights flickered," it said. "Come see where the current really goes." The lights in the service room went out, and in the darkness overhead, inside the air duct, something began to crawl. Omar didn't think. He moved. The flashlight beam swung wildly as he ducked away from the maintenance terminal and pressed himself against the breaker cabinets. Above him, the air duct trembled with deliberate movement. Metal groaned, dust drifted down through the vent slats, followed by the faint scrape of something dragging itself inch by inch through the shaft. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. The room was nearly black except for the flashlight in Omar's shaking hand and the weak standby glow of the terminal monitor. The service room door no longer rattled. Whatever had spoken was still outside, waiting with a patience no living thing possessed. Omar forced himself to breathe slowly. He needed a plan. He needed a map, an exit path, a way to ground himself in logic. Buildings had systems. Even nightmares needed architecture. He turned back to the maintenance terminal. The property management interface was still open, but now the cameras were gone. In their place was a building schematic, floor by floor, with electrical lines traced in yellow. Most of the tower looked ordinary, except for the top. Above the labeled 39th floor, where the upper mechanical levels should have been, the blueprint showed a dark, unlabeled space outlined in red. No floor number, no dimensions, just a handwritten note across it in Arabic. Original foundation void. Sealed, Omar stared at the screen. Al-Noor had been marketed as a new marvel, a jewel of modern engineering. There should have been no original foundation void. Towers like this were not built over ruins. A second line appeared on the screen and typed letter by letter without any keyboard input. "Come up then." Another. "You already heard me." The flashlight beam shook harder. Omar backed away from the monitor just as the terminal speakers crackled and a recording began playing. At first, it sounded like normal site audio. Wind, distant machinery, men speaking Arabic and Urdu, the metallic clank of construction work. Then the voices changed. The workers in the recording sounded alarmed. One shouted, "Who opened that?" Another yelled, "Turn off the power!" Then a sound cut through the room like broken electricity. A prolonged animal scream from something that had never been an animal. The recording ended with pounding footsteps and one final sentence, half sobbed by a man on the run. "It isn't in the basement anymore." The service room door handle turned slowly. Omar stepped back, scanning for anything he could use as a weapon. His hand closed around a heavy spanner lying on a lower shelf. The handle turned again, then stopped. A moment later, a voice came through the door. Not the polite maintenance worker voice this time. This voice was Omar's own. "Open the door," it said from the other side. "I found the exit." His grip tightened on the spanner until his knuckles ached. The voice repeated, more urgently now. "Omar, it's me. Open the door." It knew fear would do less than hope. He stayed silent. Seconds passed. Then the copied voice laughed softly, dropped the imitation, and spoke in its true tone, layered, dry, and impossibly deep. "Good." The lights flickered back on. The door went still. Overhead, the thing in the duct began crawling again, moving away from him now, not retreating, leading. Omar hated himself for following it, but every instinct told him staying in the service room would end with that vent bursting open above him. He shoved the cabinet aside, eased the door open, and stepped into the corridor. The sand was gone. The floor was polished marble again, clean as though nothing had happened. The corridor lights glowed warm and steady. Apartment doors were shut. At the far end stood the woman from the stairwell, barefoot now, her pale abaya trailing dust. "You shouldn't be on this floor," Omar said, surprised at how relieved he was to see anyone. Her expression did not change. "You shouldn't be in this building," she replied. Up close, he could see the damage to her more clearly. Dust caked the edges of her lashes. Her neck had an ugly bruise around it, and as though something heavy had once pinned her down. When she spoke, grains of sand clung to her lips. "Who are you?" he asked. "I was Samira," she said. "Before the opening." "Before the opening of what?" She looked upward. The floor they closed. The air in the corridor seemed to thin. Omar took a step toward her. "Tell me how to get out." Samira gave a sad smile. "You think down is out, because down is where the doors are, but it doesn't live below. It comes from above." A chime interrupted her, an elevator chime. At the end of the corridor, the service lift doors slid open by themselves. Inside stood no one, but the floor indicator above the lift read only one word. Up Samira flinched like a beaten animal. "It wants you to see," she whispered. "See what?" "Why it answers when electricity runs through the walls." The elevator remained open, waiting. Omar looked between Samira and the lift. "You've seen it?" Her eyes filled with a terrible old grief. "We all saw it," she said. "The men who dug too deep, the engineers who sealed what should have remained open, the buyers who moved in before the prayers were finished, the child on 32 who heard someone tapping from inside the wardrobe, the old man on 19 who followed his dead brother's voice into a maintenance shaft, the guard in the lobby who watched the cameras and saw too many extra people entering without reflections." She stepped back from the lift. "It likes cities that pretend the desert is gone." The doors began to close. Against every rational instinct, Omar lunged forward and jammed his arm between them. They slid open again with a gentle, welcoming hiss. He stepped inside. Samira did not follow. Just before the doors shut, she said, "If it asks whether you remember the sand, do not lie." The lift rose. No buttons glowed. No floor numbers changed. The cabin moved too smoothly, too silently, like a coffin hoisted by invisible pulleys. Omar kept the flashlight on the ceiling hatch, waiting for more knocking. Instead, he heard whispers through the walls of the lift. Not one voice. Many. Some pleaded in Arabic. Some muttered in English. Some sobbed in languages he couldn't place. One voice laughed in short, choking bursts. Another simply repeated floor numbers in descending order, over and over, as if trying to count down to something that never came. The indicator above the door remained blank. At last, the lift stopped. The doors opened onto a corridor unfinished and ancient at the same time. This was not the polished top floor of a luxury tower, My concrete walls sweated moisture. Electrical cables hung like exposed veins. The air smelled of ozone, hot metal, and dry earth. Emergency lights pulsed red at long intervals, making the entire space seem to breathe. At the far end of the corridor was a broad circular opening framed by cracked concrete and steel reinforcement bars. Beyond it lay darkness, but not empty darkness. This darkness moved like heat over asphalt. The unlabeled floor, the foundation void. Omar stepped out of the lift. Behind him, the doors shut, and the lift descended immediately, abandoning him. There were markings on the wall here, hundreds of them. Some were chalk prayers, some were desperate scratches counting days, some were names. Others were warnings layered over older warnings. Do not listen if it speaks softly. It knows the dead. We sealed the south shaft, too late. The sand was inside the concrete. Near the circular opening stood a portable site office, the kind used during construction. Its door hung open. Omar entered cautiously. Inside, the air was stale and hot. Documents lay scattered across the desk. A hard hat rested on the floor beside a coffee mug, fused to the wood by dried stains. A wall calendar still displayed a date from 8 months earlier, and pinned above the desk was a site report. He read by flashlight. During excavation, crews had uncovered a buried chamber, far deeper than survey models predicted. The chamber walls were not natural stone. They were worked surfaces, old and carved smooth. The developers ordered the discovery contained quietly. Excavation resumed around it. 3 days later, workers reported voices coming from unpowered radios. Floodlights exploded without overload. One crane operator drove off the site in a panic, later found wandering the desert barefoot 20 kilometers away. Then came the first death. A foreman named Hadi Mansour, electrical systems supervisor, was found hanging in a maintenance harness above the newly poured upper core. Officially ruled suicide. Unofficially, according to a handwritten margin note, he said something in the walls learned his voice. Another page was clipped underneath. It contained interviews. One laborer claimed the buried chamber contained no bones, no treasure, yet no artifacts. Only a stone shaft descending into blackness, with wind rising from it that smelled like old storms. Another said he heard buses in the desert at night where there were no roads. The last interview had no name attached. It was only a quote written in jagged pen strokes. It does not live under the ground. The ground was only the first door. Towers help it climb. Omar stepped away from the desk. From outside, beyond the circular opening, came a familiar sound. 3 knocks. Then his mother's voice. Omar. He went cold. His mother had died in Dhaka 11 years earlier. The voice came again, brittle with concern, exactly as he remembered from childhood phone calls. Omar, my son, it's dark here. He covered his ears, but the voice continued from every direction now. Through the walls, through the floor, or through the wires in the portable office. You used to be afraid of the dark, she whispered. Come and switch on the light. Something moved past the open office door. Omar looked. A silhouette crossed the red pulse of the emergency lamps. Not Samira, not a worker. This shape was too tall, limbs too long, neck bent at a painful angle as if still hanging from a harness. Hadi, or what wore Hadi's outline. It paused outside the office and turned its head. Though its face remained in shadow, Omar knew it was smiling. Then it walked toward the circular opening and disappeared into the darkness beyond. Omar should have stayed where he was. He knew that even then. But terror had curved into obsession. The building would never let him leave ignorant. It had shepherded him upward for a reason. He followed. Beyond the opening, up the floor widened into a vast chamber that should not have fit within the tower's geometry. The ceiling arched high above in a rough dome of ancient stone, fused with modern concrete, as if the tower had been built around something much older instead of over it. In the center of the chamber was a shaft, a perfectly round hole perhaps 20 feet across, lined in black stone, worn smooth by impossible age. No railing surrounded it, no safety markings. Only a ring of power cables ran from the chamber walls into the darkness below, descending like roots into the earth. The cables hummed. Every light in the chamber, every shimmering apartment below, every decorative chandelier and refrigerated penthouse and glowing lobby sign. Somehow, impossibly, this tower fed power into the shaft instead of drawing it up. Omar approached the edge and looked down. At first, he saw nothing. Then he realized the darkness was full of movement. Not bodies, not exactly. More like faces forming and unforming within deep black current. Open mouths, blind eyes, human features rising and sinking like drowned reflections. The shaft exhaled. Warm air struck his face, carrying the smell of scorched dust and rain on desert stone. Then the chamber lights brightened, and every cable began to vibrate. A voice rose from the shaft, not loud, intimate, the kind of voice meant for someone standing very close to you in the dark. "Omar," it said, "do you remember the sand?" Samira's warning flashed through him. "Do not lie." His throat worked painfully. Yes. The chamber went still. The darkness below seemed to listen. "When did you first forget it?" the voice asked. Images flooded his mind without permission. His first months in Dubai, laughing at the old workers who prayed before entering unfinished levels, ignoring stories about desert land being restless, mocking the idea that anything ancient could survive inside a city so new. "I don't know," he whispered. The shaft answered with something like amusement. When the lights were brighter, the hanging figure of Hadi appeared across the chamber, suspended in mid-air as though the invisible harness still held him. Around him gathered others in the Red Pulse, men in hard hats, a child in school uniform, a security guard, a woman with dust in her lungs, and shapes with no modern clothing at all. A crowd of the not quite dead ringed the chamber, not trapped, witnessing. The cables thrummed harder. Sparks danced across the stone lip of the shaft. Then Omar understood. This wasn't haunting in the simple sense. It wasn't a dead worker wandering halls for revenge. The buried chamber had been some kind of mouth, a place the old desert people had sealed and marked and feared. The tower's electrical systems, its vertical core, its endless light, its network of wires and lifts and mirrored glass, these had reopened what the sand had buried. The city had built a ladder for something that once had only one door, and now it was climbing. The voice rose again, almost tender. "Cities are prayers made of voltage," it said. "Did you think light frightened everything older than man?" One cable snapped. The sound cracked through the chamber like a gunshot. Then another. Sparks exploded overhead. The emergency lights died. But for one instant, the only illumination came from below. The shaft itself glowing with a deep buried red, as if an ancient furnace had opened its eye. In that glow, Omar saw what leaned up from the darkness. Not a face, too large for that, too unfinished. It was as if thousands of faces had been pressed together in wet black glass, straining upward into one colossal, almost human shape. He screamed and stumbled back. The crowd of dead did not move. The voice from the shaft became urgent now. "You opened us with your towers. You feed us every night. Call more height into the sky." The chamber trembled. Far below, somewhere in the tower proper, alarms began to wail floor after floor. Fire systems triggered, lifts banged in their shafts. Electricity surged violently through the walls. The thing was waking throughout the building. Omar looked around in blind panic and saw the power-controlled junction mounted near the chamber wall, the primary distribution spine for the upper levels. If he overloaded it, if he severed the feed into the shaft, he ran for it. Hadi dropped in front of him from the darkness above, feet not touching the ground. The dead engineer's face was visible now, stretched by pressure and rope burn. "It doesn't let go," Hadi rasped. Omar swung the spanner with all his strength. It passed through Hadi's chest as though through freezing smoke, but the apparition recoiled anyway, buying him a second. Omar reached the junction panel, tore it open, and grabbed the emergency shutdown lever. The shaft voice sharpened at once. "Do not." He pulled. Nothing happened. The lever was locked by an electronic seal. The keypad above it flashed alive and asked for authorization. Then, beneath the keypad, a small screen turned on and displayed a face. His own, the copied version from the CCTV. It smiled and said, "You can leave the lights on." The chamber shook again. Cracks raced across the concrete. Above, the tower groaned like a ship breaking. Omar looked at the cables, then at the sparking breaker banks, and made the only choice left. He raised the spanner and drove it directly into the exposed bus bars. The world became white pain. A blast threw him across the chamber. Sound vanished. Light detonated outward through the cables and branching veins. Every line feeding the shaft erupted in sparks. The red glow below spasmed, and from the darkness came a roar so vast it seemed to issue from the foundations of the city itself. The chamber collapsed. Stone fell, concrete sheared loose. The dead shapes around the shaft blew apart into dust and shadow. Omar felt the floor break beneath him. Then he was falling, not into the shaft, onto polished marble. He hit hard, rolled, and lay gasping beneath a rain of plaster dust. The lobby. He was in the lobby of Al Noor again. Emergency lights flashed weakly. Sprinklers hissed. Fire alarms screamed. The front doors stood open onto the pre-dawn street. Omar dragged himself forward through water and debris and stumbled outside just as the upper floors of the tower went black, one after another, descending in darkness from the top like a hand snuffing candles. By the time fire crews arrived, the worst had passed. There was smoke, electrical damage, shattered glass on upper mechanical levels, and a massive systems failure nobody could fully explain. Omar was taken to a hospital with burns on his hands and shoulder, dehydration, and mild concussion. They asked what happened. He gave them the only version they would write down: catastrophic electrical surge, likely hidden construction fault. No one mentioned Samira. No one mentioned Hadi. Officially, the building remained closed due to infrastructure instability. Investors filed quiet claims. The owners scrubbed news reports. Another luxury failure in a city that preferred not to keep its ghosts public. 3 months later, Omar left Dubai. He told everyone he wanted a calmer life, smaller projects, less height. That was true, but not the real reason. The real reason came after midnight, no matter where he slept. Because sometimes his phone rang from unknown numbers that displayed no country code. When he answered, he heard only a low electric hum and the distant sound of wind moving over open sand. And sometimes, just before dawn, all the lights in his apartment dimmed together. In that dimness, reflective surfaces changed. Window glass became black and deep as a shaft. Television screens showed rows of seated passengers in silence, and in every reflection, at the very top edge where a ceiling should have been, there was always the suggestion of another floor above him, waiting. Last week, while staying in a small apartment in Boston, Omar woke at 12:47 a.m. to 3 soft knocks from inside the wall behind his bed. He didn't move. Then the outlet beside his nightstand began to whisper in a warm, patient voice. Not his mother's. Not Hadi's. Something older now. Stronger, as if distance had only fed it. It said, very gently, "We learned to travel by wire." And when Omar finally looked toward the dark television screen across the room, he saw a city skyline reflected there that did not belong to Boston. Glass towers, red aircraft lights, a perfect black tower with one floor too many. Its top window was lit, and someone inside was waving him back,